some feedback sheets on the chairs, which someone told me was a bit public sector. But the reason why we did it is we were really genuinely interested in knowing what you think of this and what kind of things would be really useful for you. So the format of the event tonight is, you can see we've got an esteemed panel here, and Chair Nick O'Shea right on the end there. We're going to talk through how they've made the transition. That's going to take about half an hour. And then we're hoping that there'll be plenty of questions from the audience to ask questions that are coming up in your mind. And then we'll go to the other side where you just were, and we'll do some networking. You can network with each other. You can network with the panel. And we've also got a couple of other people here. So Garcia and Ben, do you want to just stand up and wave? Who have also made the move, and you can talk to them as well. You'll see their profiles in the brochure. And I think that's it. I think there's anything else to say. So I'll pass it over to you, Nick.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and you're very welcome to be here. We have 60 minutes together as a team, so it should be fun. What we're going to do is I'm basically going to ask each person on the panel to introduce who they are. I will begin that process, and then we're going to have 3 to 5 minutes from each person. What I'll then do is take one question from you after each speaker. If we judge that question to be relevant, interesting, etc., then we'll answer it, and then we'll move on to the next person. And then what I want to do is have some time at the end, really, where you can ask the things that you really need to know, and you can ask multiple people because you would have heard what they've got to say. So very briefly, my name is Nick O'Shea. I'm an economist specialising in the impact of crack cocaine and heroin usage on the NHS. I'm having a gap year. I'm setting up a brewery for people with learning disabilities.
Hi. I'm Ben Burns. I work for a specialist NGO called Engineers Against Poverty. We develop policy solutions mostly to try and tackle development problems, to try and reduce poverty, improve lives, create jobs, and specifically within the infrastructure and engineering space. We don't build anything, we don't build assets or put anything in the ground, but we work with people who do, governments and industry and civil society, to try and create better benefits for people where the assets being built.
Amy.
Yeah, my name is Amy Parker. I work for the charity called AfriKids. All our work is in northern Ghana. So we have 7 staff in the UK, really tiny team, and we have 140 in Ghana. And our work there revolves around getting people out of poverty, and we see the best way through that is through education. So we tackle any issue at the root cause that will stop children going into education. Be that the parents don't have enough money, so we do a lot of income generation and microfinance programs with families, and then we also work to get kids in school who've never been in school, get kids out of dangerous mining and into mine. There's a gold mining area near where we work. So any issue that is stopping children from getting an education is what we work with.
Hello, my name is Jill Bausch, and I'm the International Director for SRI Executives. We do executive search at middle to senior levels for most of the UN organizations, foundations. I was the former CEO of Futures Group Europe, which is an economic behavior change organization that works in HIV/AIDS, social marketing, etc. But I've personally gone between the public and the private sector about 5 times. And so I have a little bit of personal experience with it, but also I do coach people who are doing that both ways, private to public and public to private, throughout mostly the public, but also the private sector.
Tom. I'm Tom Rippin. I'm the CEO of an organization called On Purpose. On Purpose is a community of people who put purpose before profit, as you might expect from the name. Amongst other things, we run, or the main thing we do is we run a 1-year leadership program for people who want to change careers and transition into a place where they can combine purpose with profit as a career option. That basically is a 1-year full-time program combining paid work, lots of training, and one-to-one mentoring and coaching.
Hello everyone, I'm Jennifer Geary. I am the Chief Operating Officer of Save the Children UK. Save the Children, you've probably heard of it, is a big global organisation that works in 120 countries around the world and aims to ensure that children survive, learn and are protected. Save the Children UK is about 1,000 people, and last year reached 17 million children. I'm happy to talk about any of that later on.
Brilliant. So as you can see, we've got a great panel, great minds, great talent, and great fashion, obviously. And I think now you know who they are and who they work for. What we're going to have now is 3 to 5 minutes. They're going to tell you a bit about how they got to where they got to, and then some top tips. So Bernadine, you draw, or you can talk about anything. So you get to go first. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
All yours.
So I started life as a barrister, which for a number of reasons. One, I grew up in Malaysia, and there are literally at the time in the 80s one of 3 professions that was considered acceptable for Asian families. If you weren't a doctor, lawyer, engineer, then you might as well not be anything at all. So fortunately, I actually enjoyed the law, and I made a conscious decision, whether by social conditioning or innate interest, to pursue the law. I started practice in civil cases, mostly some family housing, immigration, a little bit of crime, not much, and became quite disillusioned with it quite quickly. Mostly because I became a lawyer because I wanted to help people, and I learned through the course of my early career that the law tends to be reactive, and by the time you come to the law, it's often too late, and we actually need much, well, earlier interventions and much more constructive interventions earlier on to prevent problems from arriving in the first place. So I did what any self-respecting young lawyer would do. I signed a deal with Satan and worked for then an offshore law firm, setting up offshore companies, doing a lot of M&A, some share transfers, which again was not fulfilling at all, because I'm not motivated by the number of zeros in the back of the share transfer. Whether it's £1 or £1 million made no difference to me. So again, not very fulfilling. So my career path really has been a journey of self-discovery, if you like. It's taken me many, many years to figure out what I wanted to do. I moved then into the private sector, doing consulting with Deloitte & Touche for a while, which is where I first started work on infrastructure projects, which was really interesting, but politics tends to get in the way. We worked on a large infrastructure project in the southern part of Malaysia called Iskandar Malaysia, and it promised to be magical things. It was going to be a green city powered by renewable energy. It was going to be serviced by clean transport. It's going to create jobs for local people, all fascinating stuff. But it went through so many iterations with the Prime Minister's office, and by the time it came out, all the measures for social and environmental benefits that we put in had been taken out. So it ended up being an industrial zone, and a lot of the benefits is still yet to materialize. So again, very disillusioning. I moved back to the UK to work with an executive search firm called Forrester Partners, which was really interesting. And I learned, I think, a lot of what formed my career later on. We worked on a lot of large-scale renewable energy projects. People like Electricity, which is a large wind power developer, which was latterly sold to E.ON for $1.4 billion. The Climate Change Capital, it's a private equity firm with billions under management. Forest Trust Fund, which was really interesting. And that's when I realized that infrastructure had incredible potential to transform lives and to make things better. So I decided I wanted to do something more in this space after a lot of soul searching, some brainstorming, several heart attacks from my extended family who freaked out when they realized that not only was I not a lawyer anymore, but also leaving a lucrative private sector job to work in a not-for-profit sector. And part of the reason is because nobody actually knew what international development was. Is it PR? Is it something like communications? What is it? Nobody knew. And partly because there's no money in it. So I took a 50% pay cut to do this, which freaked everybody out. I spent a lot of money coming here to the LSE to get a piece of paper that said I was qualified to do it, and then spent quite a bit of time after that trying to wheedle my way into various different jobs. So my first role leaving the LSE was with the Overseas Development Institute, which you probably already know, and if not, be happy to know that they're very biased towards LSE students. They tend to recruit almost exclusively from the LSE, so we're in good stead there. And following that, I moved to Engineers Against Property again, quite by chance. I saw the role being advertised, and at the ODI, I was doing work on climate finance, aid transparency, which is really interesting. And they had an opening at EAP, Engineers Against Poverty, and one of their flagship programs is an infrastructure transparency initiative. I'm not an engineer by background. I don't have any technical training. I learned really quick. I somehow tricked the MD into hiring me. And LinkedIn tells me that it was my 4th year anniversary yesterday. And so it's all going very well. I'm really excited. It's the best thing that I've ever done in my life. It's a scary thing, I think, is the last thing that I'll say. Giving up, as I said, taking a 50% pay cut, spending £30,000 coming into the LSE, which freaks a lot of people out, and rightly so. But having done it, I can safely say, hand on my heart, it's the best thing I've ever done. I'm poor and starving, no doubt, but happy and fulfilled. And I wake up every morning knowing why I'm going to work, knowing why or what it is that I'm meant to be doing. And it's a great company that I work with. We do some really interesting work. I get to travel lots. So I think if anyone's thinking of making that leap, and it's something that you really want to do, I would say go for it and take the plunge and do it.
Round of applause for Bernadine, please. Be brave, be poor, be prepared to disappoint your family. Okay, is there a question from the audience? No. Right, let's go on to Amy. Amy?
I thought it was very clear, very boring.
I think clear. Yes, clear. This is feedback.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I had a very different career path. I moved to the UK in 2004 from Australia, and almost on a whim and an impulse, and very naively. And I was a financial planner at home, giving advice to retirees at the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, which is a former government-owned bank. Decided to move to the UK, didn't research that my qualification meant nothing here. And also that the visa I had meant I could only work as a temp. So very silly, and had already arrived, found that out, and had already shipped furniture and things over, so I was kind of signed up. So the agency that I went to said, well, okay, you came from banking, why don't you go and be a PA? And I was horrified because I was like, no, I've been a financial advisor, so I did. In 2004, I joined Deutsche Bank as a PA to a wonderful lady in the credit risk management department, which is a very different department then than it is now. And she was also running the training program globally for all of credit risk. So I was incredibly bored as a PA, and she was a very relaxed boss. So it didn't give me much to do. So I said to her, can you let me run the training program? And she said, okay, why not? You seem like you'd be capable of interesting. So I sat through all the credit courses, taught myself complex credit derivatives and everything by monitoring all the courses, and took a post in the credit risk department at Deutsche Bank. Very cleverly, or again, I mean, luck is a big part of my moves. October 2008, I moved from the credit risk management team into the corporate social responsibility department. And if anyone's got a reasonable memory of history or has seen The Big Short, that was an excellent time to leave credit risk management at Deutsche Bank. So I'd been, while in credit risk, I was really interested in the Charity of the Year program, so I volunteered on the charity committee there at Deutsche Bank and helped select the charities that we're in. So one of my big tips would be, if you're working for a corporate now that has a charity program, get involved with that, find out what they do, volunteer as much as you can, learn about the sector as much as you can before moving. And so I found credit risk, while interesting, a little bit dry, and so I really enjoyed what I was doing with the CSR team. So I got more involved, and when an opportunity came up, moved across. So I spent 5 years running the employee engagement program, the employee giving program at Deutsche Bank in London for the 10,000 staff. And through that, met several different charities. Some were fantastic, some were not so fantastic, and sort of every year I would run the staff would vote, and I would find out who I was working with for the next year. And during that time, I found a charity, Africans, who I now work for, that I absolutely loved. I thought their ethos was fantastic. I thought what they were trying to do was different to anything else I'd seen, and I just loved the way they ran the program, and they sort of, when working with Deutsche Bank, they really made the most of the opportunity, saw how lucrative it would be, created really interesting things for us to do. So through that, I got to go out to Ghana and see the work. Immediately fell in love with everything they were doing, and signed up as an ambassador. And then, next year they moved on, and we had 2 new charities the following year. And I still kind of always, they were in the back of my mind. And it was just by chance that, it's kind of, the next charities come in, and I was kind of doing this for a while now. I really wish I was fundraising for Africans. Why am I, now doing this or that and the other? So I called the founder of Africans and said, look, if anything ever comes up, I would love to work for you. And I think the way they think about things, I didn't have the best experience. They knew I could fundraise because I'd been doing it a bit through the staff at the bank. So they offered me a post in fundraising, and I moved across. And she stepped down, our founder stepped down a year later, and I took over as chief exec from there. So yeah, so my gym. So I know it's a weird, it's a weird laugh. No, what I think, so my advice is really get involved where you can beforehand. I mean, even before I moved to AfriKids, Deutsche Bank was offering a program where you could have different charities from all the different foundations around the world were offering. They would offer you a secondment to go and work there and run a 6-week project for them. So I was lucky enough to go to Manila to work with a Child Hope Philippines and work with them for 6 weeks, helping them write a fundraising strategy. So I really got a feel for, can I do this? Am I going to be any good at all? Who knows? And really understand what it's about and say, actually, will I enjoy this? Is this what I'd like to do? You know, when I left, everyone said to me, oh, you won't have an IT guy, and those will be your frustrations, and who do you call when this breaks or that breaks? It's going to just be you. Charities have small resources. And I think that's part of it. My other piece of advice, only because a few people have said this to me, is, oh, you leave the bank and whenever you work for charity, your hours must be shorter now and it must be more relaxing. And I would say, absolutely not. I've worked double the hours I ever did at Deutsche Bank in credit risk or CSR. But again, because I'm passionate about it and I love it and I want to be there and do that. But it is hard work. Don't ever think that it's easier to go work for a charity, because it's not, I wouldn't say.
Great, thank you. A round of applause for Amy. So the headlines there are, the Australian education system is worthless. Don't be afraid to ask important people for opportunities, and to research where you go before you go. I think that's the 3 main things, plus then you're going to work lovely hard. Any question at all? Another very clear speaker, clearly. You're going to have to, anyway. Jill. I know. Wanting to move, right? Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to take half my minutes, which I think is 4 or 5.
4 or 5.
And I'm going to tell you what happened to me, but then I'm going to take the other half and say what I think might be a good idea for you to use, if it's possible, for you to take some things away, like my former panelists have done. So I started as the head of public relations in my mid-20s in North America for private sector Hyatt Hotels Group. You might have heard of them. Big worldwide hotel company. And when I came to England, you can hear my funny accent, I came to England for a very sound business decision, that was to marry an Englishman. And I got a job running for Intercontinental Hotels. I was the head of marketing for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And so things were working well for me. I did that, and I had a couple of kids and did what people do. And was making very good money and came home every night after a while, and I thought, this is not doing it for me. I wasn't feeling what Bernadette said, that she was happy and fulfilled. I wasn't feeling it. I was making money and I was on a trajectory and I had a great title and a great career, and I thought, this is not working for me. So by fluke, and we'll talk about how to manage the flukes if you want to, because everybody doesn't get to walk in and say, oh, please be our CEO. But I think the thing that you need to express to you is when you take an opportunity and how to see an opportunity. That's the thing. Because everybody doesn't go walk into your door and say, please be the CEO. Anyway, so when I was feeling like this, I thought, what shall I do? And this is a true story. I went to a meeting here in London. And it was a marketing meeting, and I was bored out of my mind. And I thought, I'm going to go get a coffee. And I went into the coffee place. I picked up a magazine, and there was an ad in the back of a marketing magazine saying, it was then the ODA, the Overseas Development Administration, which is now DFID. I'm sure you've all heard of them or worked with them. Looking for business people to teach to the people that ran their aid programs, to teach them business skills, because they were run by wonderful experts that were doctors, or they were program managers, but they didn't know very much about managing budget. So I applied. They sent a very nice message back and said, you've had 400 applications and you have absolutely no qualifications whatsoever for this. You needed FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods, you don't have it. We needed that time, you had to have a British passport. I didn't have one, even though I'd lived here for many years. And there were a list of things. You had to have women's health experience, etc. So they left me a very nice phone message saying, I'm sorry. And I thought that was polite. And then I thought, no, I'm not going to take a no for an answer. And so I somehow got hold of the guy who was hiring for this program. And I did not stalk him. I was polite. I did finally get him to agree to see me for 15 minutes. And I said, I will leave your office, I promise you. And I talked to him for 2 hours. And he gave me 1 or 4 places on a place to have ODA teach me. And that's how I made the first move into the public sector. So everybody isn't going to get that opportunity, and everybody isn't going to be able to find that person, and everybody isn't going to find the wonderful person who said, yes, I will talk to you for 15 minutes, and then believe I could do it. And I'm the only person in England who got a British passport in 5 days. Boy, did I chat them up. It really worked well. But besides that, I think not taking no for an answer is an important thing. At least it was in my career. And I think you have to be polite, you have to be gracious, you need to be elegant, you need to be firm, you need to have tough empathy, but don't take no for an answer too easily. That's one of my takeaways. I think we'll stop there because these are my 4 minutes.
Lovely. Yeah, round of applause for John. The word elegance is great. I think it's like ballsy, persistent, elegance. I think that's an important balance.
The whole tough empathy thing, which we talk about in leadership, and all of us that probably practice it in running our businesses, that is a very important, for me, has been a very important takeaway, the idea that you're tough, but you're not so tough you can't understand that people have lives and issues and problems, and we all have ups and downs, and that's really important to be a good leader, and you can't go through your career in public or private sector unless you have that, I think. So that's, you're gonna assess the takeaways now.
Well, I'm gonna ask if there's a question. This is a tough crowd. Yes, madam. What's your question?
You mentioned earlier that you've been between private and public sector several times. So how long did you stay in that position before you moved back, and when did you go?
Yeah. Well, I stayed in that position for I went into the ODA, which is now DFID, for about a year. And then I happened to run into somebody who essentially said, will you be our CEO of Futures for Bureau? And I said, no, I won't. And they flew me to Washington with headquarters was based, and they offered me the job as CEO. And I said, no, I won't, because I have 2 kids and I'm going to their rugby games and their ballet recitals, and motherhood was always very important to me. And I had the wisest man in the world, the international CEO, said, if you take the job, you'll never miss a rugby game, you'll never miss a ballet recital. As long as you do the work, I don't care when you do it in the 24-hour clock. And he stuck to that for 10 years. So the answer is I stayed there in that sector for 10 years. And then I did a few other things. I went and worked at the Graduate School of International Studies at the University of Denver, because I wanted to work with grad students and help them get into the public sector. And so I did about 4 or 5 years in academia. I did 5 years in academia. And then I went back and worked in the private sector in executive search and selection, but also coaching. So believe it or not, I worked for Dior in Paris. And I never got a handbag out of Dior. But I did get to coach them. And what I realized with my own career is that what I want to do, I have to be clear about. It doesn't matter whether it's public or private. I have to understand what gives me some motivation personally and makes me sleep at night. Like most of us probably say we made these changes, so we could.
And do you think there's a clear distinction between public and private sector in terms of the sort of dynamism, the pace, or because you've been back and forth a few times, would you say it's just dependent on the organisation itself rather than?
And my work now is moving people, finding the right ones, and then moving them back and forth. That's a really great question. I don't think it has a clear answer. I think it fully depends on the organisation. Because there are private sector organizations, I would hope the people I love don't work for them. There are public sector organizations, and I can't say who they are, but I would think the same. And I do teach, I don't know if the dynamism element is public to private. I think it's a great time right now to look at this, and you're all here and interested in it for this reason, because there are a lot of private sector skills and talent that the public sector is looking for, because some of those organizations have a lack of dynamism. I didn't mean to avoid your question, but it's not the clearest answer.
That was a cheeky supplementary, but I'll allow it. It was interesting. Tom, let's hear about you, please.
Great, sure. So I started my career in academia. I did a PhD in cancer research. I had probably assumed from when I was a teenager that I would become an academic, as most of my family are academics and teachers. I realized at some point that I was more interested in the teaching than the research, and that's kind of the wrong way around for an academic. And my other kind of big interest was international development, but realized that I had this kind of revelation, or when talking to friends and so on, that I should probably acquire some private sector skills first, and that I would then be more useful and be able to do more interesting things more quickly in international development if I did that. So I went and worked for a management consultancy called McKinsey. I thought I'd go for 2 to 3 years. I stayed for 5. Eventually kind of prized myself out of there and did a couple of things. I did a relatively short stint at Comic Relief, where I worked with the CEO on all things that had a kind of private sector angle to them. I should probably say that I guess at McKinsey I'd become sufficiently brainwashed that I was interested in trying to apply commercial and business dynamics to social problems. And I'd also figured out that actually, you know what, I've never lived in Africa or India or South America, and I probably don't want to do that, at least not for long stints of time during my career. So who am I to work in international development? And this social enterprise, this idea of combining social and commercial ways of working, actually, a lot of that happens in the UK. And hey, I'm probably quite, well, hopefully might be better qualified to work on that than international development. So I was looking for places I could combine those two things. Comic Relief was the first one, and I did that. Through that, I came in contact with a company called Red, which some of you might remember from campaigns by American Express and Gap T-shirts and so on. Many people remember it because it was founded by Bono. And I ran the European team of that for about a year. That was back in 2007, I guess. And kind of not long after that, essentially had this idea of starting up On Purpose, which is what I run now, for a couple of years, kind of knocking around my brain, I suppose, and figured, well, maybe if it's not going to happen now, maybe I'm always going to wonder what might have been if I don't give it a try. So 7.5 years ago, sat down, wrote a business plan, talked to lots of people, and eventually started On Purpose. And the first program started in January 2010. And one of our alumni, one of our fellows, is actually sitting in the back there, Catherine. Always nice to see people. So that's what I do now. In terms of kind of, I guess, tips or thinking that's helped me, I've got 3. The first was when I was leaving McKinsey, I was finding it really difficult to decide what I wanted to do, and everyone just kept on telling me to follow my passion. I found that really unhelpful because I was like, well, if I knew what it was, that would be fine, and I wouldn't be having these conversations with you and this problem. So I kind of felt I kind of got into what I call passion paralysis, where I kind of felt I had to determine what I was going to do for the next 40 years of my life. And someone who's very wise told me, you don't have to do that. All you have to do is decide what you want to do for the next 2 to 3 years of your life. And that suddenly took a whole bunch of pressure off. It was very helpful to me. However, it is helpful if you can narrow down to some extent what you want to do. But that doesn't have to mean what topic I want to work on. It doesn't have to mean I want to do health or education or international development. It can mean I want to work in a big company or a small company. Or I want to work in a charity or a social enterprise, or I want to work in something that's going through a lot of change, or I want to work in a marketing role. There's so many ways of defining what you want to do. And if you are able to do that, or the more you're able to do that, the more people are able to help you figure out what you want to do, and the more likely someone is actually to come and offer you a job or tell you that there's someone over there who needs someone just like you. Second one is it's really helpful to have a peer group. Or a kind of group of like-minded people that you're trying to do this transition with, or other people who are plotting similar things. That's, I think, a big part of the value that we provide on the program, but there's also other places like Escape the City that you might have heard of that very much kind of build on this. However, peer groups can also be unhelpful in the sense of you kind of need to be careful who you benchmark yourself against. And I guess I'm talking mainly about money now. I still have a lot of friends from university who are teachers, who work in the public sector, who whatever. I still earn a salary that's pretty comparable to them. I earn a salary that's a lot less than what I earned as a management consultant. And if I only compared myself to my management consultant friends, I earn fractions of what they earn now, kind of 8, 9 years down the line. So it depends who you compare yourself to. And so, make sure you stay in touch with as many people as you can, but some of the kind of right people as well in terms of your aspirations. Thirdly, network. I think, I mean, you probably know much better. Does this something like 80% of jobs never get advertised or something, and some ridiculous kind of number? So, you may find a job by applying to an advert, and that's fantastic. But actually, especially in the kind of social enterprise space which we operate in, and I think the wider kind of non-profit space as well, you've got to meet people, especially if you're changing careers. They might be a little bit suspicious of you. They're not quite sure of your motivations. If you go to an event, go to a meeting, volunteer once a month, or whatever, they just know your face. They'll be much happy to do that. But ask people for coffees. Most people are very happy to kind of provide some advice. But there's a but in all of these. If you ask them for coffee, make sure you know what you're asking. I've had a few too many coffees where it's just a kind of interesting chat, and that's great for you. But I do too many coffees already, and I want to make sure that I can help people, and that means they have to know what they need help with.
You're going to Tom. So without repeating your advice, which I think is very wise, and so if you do go for coffee with people, always bring cake. People like cake, bring cake. It's important. I've met many great people by bringing cake to coffee. So people are surprised. Anyway, I think it's about power of networks, you're right, and benchmarking who you know. And again, it's also, you seem to get to know the chief executive of Comic Relief. So again, it's just go for the top. Anyway, Jennifer, you are the exclamation mark of our panel.
Dear.
So no pressure. But if you tell us a bit about yourself and some tips, that'd be great.
Sure. So I started my career in Dublin, as you might be able to tell from the accent. I trained as a chartered accountant with Arthur Anderson, if anyone can hold up to your okay, you still remember, thank God. So I started out in Dublin, qualified there, and I managed to get a move with Anderson's to New York. Spent a couple of great years in New York, straddled by 9/11, actually, quite an interesting time. There was sort of pre-9/11 and post-9/11, which was sort of interesting. Decided to come back to London in 2002, and I got a job with Barclays, and I ended up being with Barclays for, gosh, 13 years. So I did 5 years in the investment bank, when that was sort of on the run-up in the sort of the heady days of Bob Diamond and his big growth plan. I did 5 years in wealth management, and latterly I was the chief of staff to the group general counsel at Barclays. And so something happened in and around my mid-30s. A couple of things, some parallels actually with your experience, Amy, where I got involved in the Citizenship Leadership Council in Barclays, which was sort of a brand name for, in the sort of post-crash, post-LIBOR fixing, post-PPI scandals and everything, all the banks were sort of trying to figure out their public persona, but also their social value and their social utility. And Barclays set up a group to do that, and I joined that group, and I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the discussion and the thought process and the dialogue. So much so that I asked one of the people who was helping us to see if there was any way of me getting some sort of non-exec directorship to maybe complement my day job in Barclays. And he said, well, what are you interested in? And I said, I think it's children, it's women and children, it's something women do. And he said, well, what about Save the Children? I have a contact there. So I sent him my CV there, still thinking non-exec role that would complement the day job. They met me, and long story short, they said, we can talk about the non-exec thing, but actually we have a more pressing need. We have seen your CV. Our COO is about to go on maternity leave, and do you think there's any way you could convince Barclays to release you for 9 months to come and be our COO? And I distinctly remember the moment I got the email. My heart leapt in my chest, and I just knew that I had to somehow make this happen and convince Barclays to do it, which I did. So I spent 9 months as an interim cover for the COO, and that was supposed to be the end of it. She came back. I was supposed to go back to Barclays. She shortly announced afterwards that she was moving on. I was asked to apply for the permanent role, and here I am in the permanent role later. I think just to pick up on some of the themes of my fellow panelists, I do agree with the point that if there is any way, well, obviously getting involved in corporate social responsibility or something within your current organization is a wonderful bridge where you don't have to jump in with 2 feet and you get to try something out a little bit. And if there are rotation schemes, tours of duty, pulse programs, whatever it is. I think that's a really great way to do it. It is really quite startling to me that it was just actually the matter of asking that it resulted in something. And someone said to me, when you open yourself up to the universe and when you actually ask and make the ask of the right people, it is amazing how the stars align and things come through. And I certainly felt that in my case. And I had to do some work to convince Barclays, but once I had decided that it was something I wanted to do, I sort of made it happen. And you know, maybe we'll get into this a little bit more at some point. But I found to my relief when I landed in Barclays that at least 60% of what I had done in my previous roles was applicable in the not-for-profit space. Thank goodness I was of some use. You know, they needed a strategy, they needed a finance plan, they needed some technology projects delivered, and I was sort of able to say, okay, I know this. There's lots I don't know, but I know enough to be useful day one, which was thankful for all concerned. And you know, to the point about sort of how long, I know one of you asked about how long. The advice that was given to me by someone from the private sector was they felt, and actually I'd love to hear your opinion on this as well, that you could certainly safely do 2 to 3 years in the not-for-profit sector if you still harbored intentions of going back to the private sector. That it was, you know, that, and certainly if you could demonstrate the relevance of what you have done. But you may have to confuse them. I'd love to hear that as well. That's my story.
Can we thank Jennifer? So again, a bit of timing, a bit of luck, but in the end, you've got to make it happen, and I think that's been a continuing theme throughout the discussions. So we're now going to open it up. We've got 25 minutes before we go and drink. So that's what's on my mind. So what I want to do now is take some questions. I'm going to ask for 3 responses to each question as a maximum. We've also got Garcia and Ben here, who are our contributors, and if you want to chip in at any point, just give me the nod. So please make them really interesting, no pressure. And if you have a specific person that you want to get a reflection from, can you also please tell me? So let's have the first question, please. Fortune favours the bold. Oh, look, 2. Okay, I'm going to take the gentleman, then I'll take the lady who's asked question. Gentleman.
Yeah, a general question for the panel is, you know, once you've got into the role the first time, first role in the not-for-profit sector, what were the things that were evident once you started that you were surprised by?
Any takers? Jill, and then we'll go to Jennifer.
I must have got my mouth open.
Slightly ahead of Jill.
Some of this, please understand, is quite personal. But then you hear it repeated from others too. So I don't think it's just my experience, my personal experience, and also my professional experience working with people to do this. One thing is that you sometimes feel like you're going to have a greater sense of doing good. I think it's a lot of many people are motivated to move from private to public because they feel it's the time in their life where they want to do that. You can call it giving back or whatever you want to say. And I laughed about the idea that it was easier in the public sector. Well, it isn't easier, but you don't always get that feeling of doing good immediately. That's one thing I think shocks people. They think I'm still working 12-hour days, I have less money to do it, my budgets are smaller, and I have to report to various governments in certain places where I didn't have to do before, which you have to report to a board in the private sector. That's one thing. The other thing is, in my personal case, is I did things, maybe in life always backwards, but I got the job as the CEO, and then I realized I didn't have the credentials that were going to make me authentic and credible when I got out there as the CEO of a big international organization that was working with governments. And so that's when I came back to LSE and got my master's degree. So I guess the takeaway from that is make sure you have the creds. Now, all of you are sitting in here, in this institution, probably do have the creds. But by creds, I mean, you don't have to have the PhD. You probably have to have the good master's degree. But you also have to be able to talk the talk in the business that you're going to, whether it's public or private sector. And I see private sector people that haven't really gotten that development talk that public sectors speak. They haven't watched enough and listened enough. So that can be a hard part of the transition.
So a couple of builds on that. I would echo what's been said before about drive and ambition. Save the Children is probably the most ambitious place I have worked in, and I was a consultant before I came to Barclays as well. And a number of people who came from the private sector to Save the Children said to me, I've never worked so hard in my life. So there is certainly that about it. I think I would say, be confident in terms of, you've all come from an LSE background, you've got techniques and formulas and frameworks and learnings, and don't be afraid to apply them. And even sometimes people in the not-for-profit space don't like hearing, oh, this is just like that thing that I did when I was in banking. They're like, they don't want any association with that. But actually, there is a lot of applicability of concepts and project management techniques and all that kind of thing that absolutely can be applied. And in terms of connection to the cause, I guess every experience it is going to be different. It's true to say, I'm not out there. I have visited programs. I'm not out there directly interacting with children. But I get daily sit reps from our operations all around the world. I can speak anytime I want to grizzled humanitarians who have done everything from run Ebola treatment centers to deal with the aftermath of wars. And we have lunchtime talks, and we have we have TED Talks and sessions and everything else on what's going on. So and there's a lovely thing in Save the Children, which is almost every sentence is finished with so that we can deliver for children. We need to get some costs out of the system here so that we can deliver more for children. And I like that. I still feel so. It mightn't be a tangible connection, but the linkage I feel is there, and I find that very good.
But it sometimes just takes a bit of time
to understand the link and the connection. I agree.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to that. I think for me the biggest shock was how actually emotional it was going to be to work for charity. So there's so many highs and so many lows in there on far bigger extremes, I think, than anything else I'd done before. So, for example, we had a child who had hole in heart and they couldn't do that surgery in Ghana, and we needed to raise $8,000 to get her to India for the surgery, and we thought we weren't going to make it. So one day you're, oh, who am I going to ask for the money, and what if I don't get it, and then it's on you, and then we got the money, but then we're too late. And so it goes back and forth, and then a donor might pull out, and you were about to launch in the program, what it's going to be able to do, and the donor might pull out. So you crash, and then the next day you get a surprise gift of £10,000, and it's the best day of your life. So I think the ups and downs are a lot more dramatic, and I think we do, and that's frightening.
Yes, you can get full thoughts.
I echo all of the points that my fellow panelists have said, and I agree that it's, as I said earlier, emotionally rewarding and fulfilling. But having said that, I think certainly in my experience working in the not-for-profit sector, we have to be almost realistic about it, that things work differently. And what that means is that if you've been in the private sector for a long time and you're used to certain efficiency gains or processes, and not all of them, and there are maybe Save the Children, I don't know, maybe I haven't worked with them, but certainly in my experience with the not-for-profits and even the large not-for-profits, things work differently, and it's just a different beast, and we need to be tapped into what that organism is and what that looks like and how that works, and to remember that because it works differently, not to get too frustrated when things don't happen. And the same applies also to the multilateral banks or the bilateral banks, particularly if your organization is working with aid funding or donor funding. Often your contracts are signed, you've got £2 million or however much it is that's supposed to be dispersed to you, but it can take 10 to 12 months for that disbursement to actually happen. And during that 10 to 12 months, you're supposed to be delivering on project activities, but without the funds, you can't actually deliver, which inevitably leads to a knock-on effect of late delivery. And it depends who your client is. Often they're okay with it. They realize that they disperse late, and that's great in a way, but it's also frustrating if you've got a timeline and there's good that you want to do on the ground to try and get things happening, and that can be really frustrating. And often things are not as streamlined as you'd hope and expect them to be, and I think we need to be realistic about that and take it on the chin a little bit.
Can I say, as an observations chair, I've done a few of these, and I think what you've got here is quite an unusual panel, actually. It brings you very, very honest with you. in a way that is quite unparalleled. So you've got a it's unusual to have this level of experience and honesty in the same room. So I just would advise you to go with that. So let's hear from the lady that asked the question before and take some more questions.
Sorry, just one more. It was Bernadine. I was wondering if the infrastructure and the engineering companies that you work with over the last 4 years or longer that you've been working with them, you've noticed that they're increasingly concerned by their own CSR and ESG credentials, or whether you find it maybe frustrating that they haven't sort of increased their consideration for that area.
There is a growing awareness. There is a growing interest in doing things differently. I have to caveat that also by saying we work with industry and we work with companies, but also a lot of our work is with governments and civil society and the banks. But in terms of private sector, there is a growing awareness. In fact, private sector is very often our strongest supporters. I'll give you an example. We did some work in Qatar dealing with World Cup infrastructure in run up to 2022. Now, they've gotten a lot of stick about it, and rightly so, and I think there's a lot of work by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. We're doing a lot of work to highlight some of the difficulties and the challenges that are being faced there, and a lot of the abuses for migrant workers, and that's absolutely right, and that's absolutely what we need. We were asked to join the campaign, but we decided in the end that that's not a role for us. We're not a lobbying organization. We develop solutions. And so what we did then was we went into Qatar to try and work with governments, to work with Qatar 2022, the Supreme Council for the World Cup Committee, Qatar Foundation is building a lot of education infrastructure, to try and understand what their difficulties were to improving conditions. And very often what we found in the work that we do is that it's not intentional. It's that companies or governments don't have the capacity, don't actually understand what they need to do to deliver those improvements. And there were simple measures that we could then propose to them that doesn't obviously solve the problem. It doesn't make any of the atrocities go away, but there were measures that we could recommend to them that they hadn't really thought of before. Simple things like paying workers on time, for example. We all know about bonded labor and human trafficking and all of that. And a lot of the problem is because work is not being paid on time. And simple solutions that we put in was to make sure that workers have bank accounts, and that there are ways to do that, and to make sure that electronic payments are made so that we can track when payments are made or not. Because previously workers couldn't prove that they hadn't been paid, and because of unscrupulous actors or whoever. So I think the short answer is that there is a change. That not everyone, obviously, and there are some companies out there who are not responsive, but a lot of organizations out there are changing. They're trying to do things better. I also work on an infrastructure transparency initiative, and again, industry is our strongest supporters. We have the European international contractors who are always with us at any of the events that we need to go to, who are lobbying donors to help us make this work. And often it's because we have the demand from the industry that governments are sitting up and taking note. Because often governments' usual argument is that we can't do this because industry doesn't want it, or there's going to be a mass boycott, we're going to lose investment, we're going to lose money. But because we've got industry behind us, that's when the solutions that we propose actually take effect.
Just to give you some prior warning, I'm going to ask you in a minute to give me in a sentence what the biggest downside is and the biggest upside is, but not yet. Who's next? Yes.
I just wanted to ask you, Jill, you mentioned that you were going to help us trying to spot the right opportunity. I'm just curious about that. If you could.
Gosh, did I say that?
Yeah.
I think I said, try to spot the right opportunities based on what you know you want. And let me give you an example. Because how do you know? And it's following up what Tom said. I'm so sick of people telling me to follow my passion. You don't really know what it is. But you're here for a reason. So you think for 10 seconds, what's the reason that you're here? Unless you're writing an article, you work for LSE, you're here for a reason. You must be interested in the public sector, presumably. And what is it? Is it this feeling of contributing? And is it some sense of the private sector is not for me? There's that thing that Jennifer talked about where, ooh, private sector, ooh, money, ooh, it's ugly. Is it that? Is it that you come from a family and that's a legacy you want to carry out? What is it? There's something about you that you're looking for. So everybody's going to have a different answer. Now, how do you know when to find it? How to find it? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? But I think thinking about what motivates you. What motivates me is helping people find jobs where it changes their life. Not to sound over, hyperbole, but that's motivating to me. And I realized it didn't really matter what sector, but I had to do some jobs in between both of them to find that out.
There's a couple of things I'd say, which it's not about writing long pros and cons lists. It's not an intellectual exercise in life to figure out what you want to do. The same person who told me to figure out what I want to do for 2-3 years said, go and hang out with some cool people.
Yeah, really like
like
it.
Go and like find some people who are doing stuff that you think looks interesting. Find out what they do and why they do it, and just kind of, and you'll notice after a while that you hang out with some people, you go, that's cool, but it's not for me. And then at some point you come across something, you go, that's really cool, and actually I can see myself doing that. And maybe for 2 to 3 years, at which point, bingo, it's enough.
And can I footnote that? Find organizations that are also the cool ones that you like what they do. Actually, this is a really rare thing, odd thing for a headhunter to say, but I've never gotten a job that way. I've always found organizations that I thought did interesting things. They found me sometimes, but I've found the top person and said, I wrote the letter and said, I love what you do. I think I could be an asset to you. Which you have to do it in an elegant, hopefully, way. But that's one thing you could do.
Jen.
And I think just one addition. This was a thought that occurred to me, but I later heard Steven Spielberg saying the same thing, so I must be onto the right thing. What I and he said. That's hilarious. I had to listen really, really hard to myself to find what that thing was. It wasn't obvious to me. It's not all my life I wanted to do it. I'm sure it was linked to having my own 2 children and realizing what it took to bring a life into the world and look after a child and realize how fortunate my kids were. I'm sure that triggered it. But it was only when I sort of expressed it and then got involved with Save the Children that I remembered that essay that I wrote when I was 10 years old about Christmas, when everyone else wrote about Christmas trees, and I wrote about a girl on the street who didn't have enough to eat. And I remembered how impacted I was by Live Aid, and it was there. It was just really, really latent, and I had to listen really hard. So, and I don't know the fast track formula to kind of finding that thing. It
Well, maybe I can share what I did. So my career trajectory, from my introduction earlier, it's not conventional. I did many different things before I finally settled in international development, and I'm happy here. But it took a long time. I mean, I started out as a barrister in one sector, and then I moved to another, then I did some consulting work, and then I became headhunter, and all of that was a process of self-discovery. And at the end of it, when I realized that I wanted to do something more, but not really quite knowing what it was, and Tom mentioned a passion paralysis. And again, everyone said, well, follow your heart, follow your heart. No idea at all. And I think what it took for me was to firstly stop freaking out, and tell myself that it was okay that I was in my 30s and not really knowing what I wanted to do. And a really good piece of advice from my then boss at Forrester Partners, which was a search firm, was that he told me that it's okay to be in your 30s and not know what you want to do. That's okay. A lot of people don't figure it out until you're in your 30s. That's fine. And that released me a little bit. But then also what I did was I gathered some of my closest friends, leaving out all the people who told me that I shouldn't do a career change because I was ruining my life, and all the people who were turning in their graves because I stopped being a lawyer, and that was horrible, horrible, horrible. And again, that was something that was huge, because I'd grown up thinking that I was forever perpetually going to be a lawyer, and when that stopped, I had no idea. So I sat down with some really close friends, and we workshopped it out. In my living room, we put up flip charts, and we thought about what are the things that made me tick. What are the things that I liked, what are the things that I did like, and as Tom said, it was quite broad. It was, well, what did I want to do? Well, I wanted to become a lawyer because I wanted to help people And I only stopped doing that because I didn't feel that the system worked and I wasn't helping people. So what else can I do that would help people? And what do I mean by that? Am I going to be a comedian and make people laugh? Or am I going to be a chef and feed people? What does that mean? And just think about that and thought about my strengths and what I enjoy doing, and then tried to marry that together. And that actually resulted for me in a bunch of lists of potential organizations and things that I might like to do in potential roles. And what I then did was I picked up the phone and I called people. Some people I knew. I was fortunate because as a headhunter, I was connected to some very senior people. But some people I didn't know. Some people I just thought were interesting, and I called them and asked for a coffee. And as Tom said, had some very specific questions. And everyone's always very helpful. And through that, I came up with a strategy for where I needed to go next. And I think it's partly thinking. It's like it sounds silly, but just think, like really think, what do you like, and listen to that, and then you can develop a strategy for how to get there.
Right, we're going to do downsides, upsides in a Mexican wave format. So we're going to start with you. So we do downsides first, and then upsides. So downside, please.
Efficiency or lack of.
For me, the downside was the number of times thinking, would I have been better staying in banking, earning a lot of money and donating, or am I adding more value in the organization? And I think that we've talked a little bit about, I felt guilty doing my job, or I was unfulfilled there. I think that we need people to do all the jobs, and I think if you can donate and maybe sit on a board, that's just as amazing. And so for me, the downside is a number of times I've thought, actually, perhaps I should have stayed in banking and pursued a career there and donated. Why would I have been more valuable to the charity?
It's very honest. Jill?
Resources, lack of resources. Joke about you're never going to have an IT person. Yeah, that's true. You should get rid of it. There's not enough resources.
Tom, downside for you?
It comes down to silly things sometimes. Every now and again, when I'm walking through an airport, I have a pang, a kind of twinge that I can't use the business class.
Very honest.
Echoing the previous one, is usually a financial downside, which you have to plan for and you have to weigh in.
Yes. My downside is I'd like an Audi A7 and I don't have one. Right, upside. Jennifer, we're going to begin with you. So what's your upside?
I'm going to give two quickly: connection to the cause and the people. The people I work with are just some of the most decent, talented, diverse, amazing people I've ever worked with.
Great. Tom?
I think the upside for me is, but it's a bit difficult to prize apart, is this the fact that I'm in the social sector, or the fact that I've started up my own organization. But it's really about the fact that I'm not going around every day wondering what I ought to be doing.
That's a very good one. Jill?
There are a lot of good ones. I think being able to see the things in the world that I've seen in over 50 countries, in places people never ever get to go, and I honestly did it on somebody else's dime because I got paid to do it. So how lucky could a person be? I guess that's the big one for me.
Hey.
I think for me is, I guess on the inside, seeing then the days when it was the right thing to do, and you do make great gains what you're doing, or you get something from you that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So for me, I think it's working with something I love and still learning. I think got bored at Deutsche Bank, and I would have stayed there, and I don't necessarily think my next job won't necessarily be in the corporate world, or I'm not necessarily now I'm here. I think for me, a job needs to be, as long as I'm still learning, I'm still excited about what I'm doing, and I can contribute, then that's great to me. So for me, it's still learning and being part of something that I love.
Great.
I think, I've drunk the Kool-Aid, so I think for me there are many more upsides than there are downsides, and the overriding one is fulfillment. It's emotionally rewarding and emotionally fulfilling. And I echo what my panelists have said, but I'm also in tears every time I pass the business class lounge, or when I have to do a 15-hour flight to Central America, which I do a lot, which is again one of the perks of my job, being able to travel a lot, but in coach and cattle class, and that's painful. But But I also remember my last job before moving into the development space. I was being extremely well paid. We flew business class all the time. There was a business airline called EOS, in fact, that was just a business airline. There were only 30 seats on the entire jumbo jet, and you get somebody to come up with.
Is this therapy, Benedict?
Therapy. I'm actually more
drinks. No, sorry.
got me down pillows, pajamas. It was great. But
upside.
But yeah, all having said that, I remember sitting at my desk being completely miserable, completely miserable. And the highlight of my day was choosing what flavor Nespresso I was going to have. And the special mistake was like my best friend. And it was soul destroying, it was gut wrenching, it was horrible. And I just wanted to stab myself in the eye. And now I don't have that. Now I'm excited. The AP is a great place, and not just the AP, there are lots of other organizations that I've worked with, but I'm so psyched. I'm poor and starving. I can't buy the shoes that I like or the clothes that I used to, but I'm excited. I'm doing good work, and it makes such a difference to me. And I wouldn't change it for the world, and I wouldn't go back.
Well, there you go. Any last question?
Can I just
yes,
make
Garcia,
a point?
of course you
I
can.
think another real upside. I work for Cancer Research UK, and it's a very large charity. And one of the things that I see, because I'm an HR professional, so I spend a lot of time offering careers advice, is that there are a lot of career options if you're prepared to be flexible, and if you're prepared to be curious and explore what those options are. In cancer research, there's obviously a big scientific directorate, there's a big fundraising directorate, there's a big policy directorate, and my job's been to help people move between those directorates and feel really fulfilled. They're all lined up behind the the cause, but they've got fantastic opportunities, and I think that's true in many of the the smaller charities as well, because you have to multitask as well. You learn a whole load of transferable skills which enable you to move around a charity, and then your career becomes a bit of your oyster. You can go back into the public sector, the private sector, or just progress your career within the charity as well. So my advice is about looking at your options, being as flexible as you can be, and just exploiting every opportunity you can.
Ben, do you want to add any upsides?
Yeah, to at least said something. So yeah, I would echo that same point actually, and that's something that Amnesty, which being a large organisation, but people have come in. There's a lot of ex-lawyers at Amnesty, as I am, but people have come into also. I still practice as a lawyer, but most people have come in and worked in business and human rights. They've worked as researchers, and people have moved around. They've worked in the Africa program. I know people have worked in the Africa program and moved across and worked for our Asia Pacific program, for example. So I think it's that horizontal movement within the organisation, which wouldn't have been possible at a corporate law firm where I used to work. So.
Does this building make this noise a lot, Sean?
It's the gym downstairs for dropping weights.
Right. Okay.
We'll take your word for it.
We'll take your word. Right. I think what we might do is call it quits. What I say now is we move to the informal part of the evening. So you've got Ben, you've got Garcia, you've got Jennifer, Tom, you've got Amy, you've got Jill, and you've got Bernadine. You do not have me. So what I would say to you is go and talk to these people. They have experience. They are honest. They want to talk to you. They're giving up their Thursday evening when we sing whatever's on Saturday or something on Thursday night, but they're missing that. And there's booze. So could you give a big round of applause and then go get Let's go. I love your